We're less than a month away from the New York City primary elections, and this is the first time voters across the city will make their selection using ranked choice voting. But what will that look like, and how will the votes be counted? CBS News political reporter Adam Brewster breaks it all down.
New York City's June mayoral primary will serve as the first major test for a new voting system known as ranked choice voting. The system allows voters to rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference on their ballots. A candidate needs more than 50% of the vote to win. While ranked choice voting has already been used in some smaller special election races for city council in New York, this will be the first time it is being implemented in a citywide election. For more, I'm joined by CBS News political reporter Adam Brewster. Hi there, Adam. So can you go a little more in depth on how this all works? What if a candidate doesn't receive a majority of the votes after the ballots are counted?
So they'll go through the first choice votes, and if a candidate does not have a majority of votes, then there are additional rounds of counting. So what first happens is the candidate with who received the fewest votes is eliminated. That candidate's, the voters who supported that candidate, if they selected a second choice, as you mentioned in the introduction, you can rank up to 5 candidates. Those second choice votes will be redistributed to the candidates who are remaining. If there's still no candidate who has reached the 50% plus 1 mark, the candidate with the next fewest votes will be eliminated, and then second or third choice votes will be redistributed to those who are remaining. And that process continues until one candidate finally crosses that 50% plus 1 threshold. This is a system facing a first citywide election in New York. You mentioned a few special elections this year. It's been used, in more than 400 elections across many different cities, including cities like San Francisco and Minneapolis. But New York is by far the biggest jurisdiction to use this system in this election cycle. And this is the first time since voters changed the way New York does primaries that they'll be using ranked choice voting. It'll only be certain races that are using the system, but of course the big ticket race is the Democratic primary for mayor, which will almost certainly determine who the city's next mayor is.
So you said only in certain races. Remind our viewers why New York City changed to this new system.
So this was something that voters approved a couple of years ago in 2019. Now, 2019 and elections in New York are relatively quiet. The mayor's election comes after the presidential election cycle. There's no statewide races. There's no federal offices typically on the ballot in those races. Nonetheless, it was approved by a wide margin. And one of the things that it does is it replaces the city's old primary system where you would have these crowded fields like now. There were 8 candidates who qualified for the debate stage. There's about a dozen who are actually on the ballot. And under the old system, if no candidate hit 40% of the vote, there would be a runoff between the top 2 candidates. So that was an expensive solution to then require voters to come back out again. You'd have to fire up all of the election sites, bring back all the poll workers, and run an election that sometimes didn't necessarily have high turnout. So that was one of the things that it was pitched as, is, hey, we can get rid of these low turnout runoff elections and instead do that sort of runoff, this instant runoff. That's another way that advocates refer to ranked choice voting in this process, where we will just eliminate people as we go up until one candidate has built enough support between first, second, third, fourth choices that candidate has received a majority of support of primary voters.
Well, are there any apparent downsides to ranked choice voting?
So, advocates say this helps boost turnout, it boosts engagement, it requires people to learn about the candidates to talk about issues and, not necessarily focus on just attacking one another exclusively. There's some research out there that questions whether it has a major impact on turnout. Certainly, it's a slightly more confusing method of voting. It's not something that people are inherently used to. Typically, if you were voting for multiple candidates on a ballot, it might be for school board or a judge, where you go down a row and you tick off the 3 candidates who you would like to vote for, but now you have to fill out the ballot in a certain way to make sure that the votes get counted properly in the way that you were intending for them to vote. And that of course requires a large education effort, something that the city is undergoing. So advocates certainly trumpet many of the things, and in New York, as I mentioned in the previous question, getting rid of those runoff elections where you were seeing candidates win with 41% or nobody hitting that 40% mark and having to run another election. Getting rid of those is certainly one of the benefits of this.
So bottom line here, Adam, what's the time frame? How long could it take before we know a winner in this race?
So the time frame is still being figured out, but the bottom line is it's going to be a while. Earlier today, the State Board of Elections approved the tabulating software that will be used in those special elections that we talked about earlier. Those races had to be counted by hand because there was not a tabulating software. If that software hadn't been approved today, this would have had to be done by hand. Primary day, though, is June 22nd. That night, we should learn some unofficial results of how people on Election Day and people who voted early, how their first choice votes went. But absentee ballots can arrive for up to a week after Election Day in New York. There's also a deadline several days after that allows people to fix issues they may have had with their ballot. If they were missing a signature or there was a mismatched signature, something along those lines. And so it could take several days, if not a couple of weeks, before all of the votes are in and they are able to calculate everything, because you could be eliminating people by a difference of 1, 2, 3 votes where you want to make sure you have everything accurate. The city said today that next week they'll probably have a slightly more detailed timeline of how that will all play out.
All right, Adam Brewster. Adam, always good to see you. Thank you very much.